One thing became incredibly clear to me as I was working through the House of David content, and that is there is so much more depth that is possible with this storyline. And so I want to do a couple specialty episodes. This episode is going to go deeper into kind of the 30,000 or from the 30,000 foot summary that we already did. I introed the first video with the concept of cosmic geography, and I'm already getting so many questions about what's going on with Genesis 11 and how is Genesis 11 and Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9, are they connected? Like, how are we supposed to understand this whole sons of God situation, and what's going on with the variant reading of the sons of Israel and which one is correct? And so in this episode, I want to focus specifically on cosmic geography. And the reason why cosmic geography is so important within the context of the David narrative is because it's literally the backdrop of the David narrative. Not only is it the backdrop of the David narrative, it's the backdrop of the entire Old Testament. And not only is it the backdrop of the entire Old Testament, it is in fact the backdrop of the entire biblical narrative, the Old and the New. And not only is it the backdrop of the entire Old Testament and the New Testament, it is the context and the backdrop of what we are dealing with today. And so cosmic geography is absolutely important. And the opening scene of David is the battle scene with David and Goliath. And the interesting thing is that this is taking place in the Valley of Elah. The Valley of Elah is a border location that separated the Philistine land and the land of the Israelites. And so it was on this turf, as you could say, that this battle took place, and whoever wins gets to expand their territory into the other person's territory. And so the people of Israel were given the land of Canaan, and they were also given responsibility to expand and to take over that land. And clearly that didn't fully take place because of the conquest with Joshua, and David's got to pick up where Joshua left off. And that is why I actually think cosmic geography is really important. Okay. We start with cosmic geography actually in Genesis chapter 11, when the people of the world gather together on the plains of Shinar, and they make a decision that they're going to build a temple tower. Now, why is it that this is even a decision that they might make? In the ancient Near Eastern world, geographical locations were connected with supernatural and cosmic realities. So mountains were understood as the meeting place between God and men. If you just think about it from a spatial standpoint, it makes sense. It's like the highest point of the earthly context, and that would be the perfect landing spot of these heavenly divine beings where both humanity and the gods or God could meet. And so mountains are important. Just think about Mount Olympus with Zeus. I mean, all of these types of things. You see this as a pattern. Well, where do the other religions of the world, where do they get these patterns from? They get the patterns from the one true story, which is God's biblical narrative, God's story. And so in Genesis 11, the people find themselves in a very difficult position because they find themselves in the plains of Shinar. And what are not on plains? Mountains are not on plains, and they can't meet with God. And so they make a decision that they're going to build a ziggurat temple tower. There's a lot of archaeological backing for this concept. And there are some archaeologists that believe they may have even found the temple tower, the ziggurat tower that the Tower of Babel even was. And the whole concept of it was to build a house for the deity. So they would build this massive temple. At the very top of the temple would be a house, and that would be the place where the God would reside inside of that house. And even in the kind of geographical archaeological diggings, you find that there was also at the foot of the temple places for the priests and the people to live, and there were these massive stairs to help them get to the place where the God resided. And so we find all of this kind of connecting together. The problem is God told his people not to go up, but to go out and into the world. And so what we actually find with the Tower of Babel is a picture, a story of utter human rebellion. And often what we're going to see is where there is human rebellion, there's also a supernatural or cosmic echo, cosmic rebellion that is happening as well. Hey, Humble Theology fam. It's kind of wild, but I wrote my very first book and it released earlier this year. It's called The Hidden Peace. Here it is right here. Finding true security, strength, and confidence through humility. Really what I wanted to do was write a book that was accessible for the everyday average Bible reader, but gave you some sound biblical theology on the ancient virtue of humility, which was in fact the very virtue that sustained and helped the first century church to thrive and flourish. And this was all based around Philippians 2, 8, and 9, the idea that Jesus himself really exampled for us and modeled for us divine humility. And so the book is available right now. If you've ever felt anxious, if you are worried about what other people feel or look about you, I mean, if you've had any type of insecurities really at all in your life and it has robbed you of peace, the secret to the peace that you've been longing for is this ancient virtue that has for far too long been neglected, the virtue of humility. The Hidden Peace is available on Amazon and all the major book retailers where you would normally get it. You can also get a copy from Proverbs 31 Ministries, the P31 bookstore, which is where I serve as Director of Theology. And I'll have a link in the show notes for you as well. I pray that this book would be an encouragement for you as you grow and you learn how to cultivate the soul of humility, which is in fact the soil in which all the fruit of the Spirit of Galatians 5 flow from. Blessings to you, friends. At the end of the narrative, it kind of starts with everybody has one language. And then we get kind of, in Genesis 10, you have the table of nations. And so you have the presence of multiple nationalities, but also one language that knit all the nationalities together. And then as a consequence for humanity's rebellion, the one language is taken away. And when the one language is taken away, the people are left with their own national languages and tribes and people. So for instance, let's just say there's a room full of people and we could split that room up into 3 segments, and maybe one segment, their national language is Telugu. I'm Indian, so that's what I speak. My family speaks Telugu. The other maybe segment, everybody speaks Hebrew, and maybe the other segment, everybody speaks French. But here's the good news. All 3 segments speak English. And because we all speak English, we can relate to each other. But imagine in a flip, just a snap, that the one language that united us all, the English language, was taken away. Well, who are you going to talk to? People who speak Telugu are going to talk to themselves. People who speak Hebrew are going to hang with themselves, and people who speak French are going to hang with themselves. You see, and this is what happens. So when language is taken away, and when the one language is taken away, the people just separate into their own nationalities. By the way, this is the origin story of the nations of the world. Now, Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9, it actually gives us the aftermath of this story. And it is really important because it tells us that in this context that God handed over the nations, because they were rebellious, of the world, the nations of the world, to the sons of, and then there's a question mark. To the sons of ? And the goal for this handing off is stewardship, not rulership. I'll say it again. The goal is stewardship, not rulership. They were to protect and steward these people up until the time that God would redeem and restore all the nations of the world. Now, why did I do this little question mark, the sons of ? If you take a look at a variety of different Bible translations, modern Bible translations today, KJV, NKJV, NLT, NIV, NASB, CSB, ESV, you're going to notice different options. One of the options is that you'll find the English phrase, the sons of Israel. When you find sons of Israel, this is a tell that lets us know that the interpretive decision that's being made by these scholars that are part of a committee to kind of agree upon the language that we're going to translate a original Hebrew phrase into English, like what's the best one, that they have to make interpretive decisions. Let me say it this way. Every translation, right, is inherently an interpretation. You have to make interpretive decisions. And so whenever you take a source language and you translate it into a target language, the source language translated into the target language by necessity has to include a level of interpretation. And so when we get sons of Israel, we're getting this nod to an interpretation that these are human beings. These are human stewards. I believe there's a problem with that. And one of the problems is that the Septuagint, the Hebrew Bible translated into Greek, which is an excellent commentary almost on the Hebrew Bible itself. And the Septuagint is, in fact, what the majority of the New Testament authors are actually quoting. The Septuagint, in this passage, they have the angels of God as an interpretation. In fact, there's a brilliant New Testament scholar, G.B. Caird, who early, before the Dead Sea Scrolls were ever found, made a fascinating and I would call crucial observation that this seemed to indicate that there was some type of edit or emendation that took place with the Masoretic text, because probably the original reading should have been a divine being, supernatural beings. I think a lot of New Testament scholars and even some Old Testament scholars probably threw some shade on Dr. Cade. But you know what? He was right. And you know why I think he was right? Because the Dead Sea Scrolls were found after he had made that kind of, Caird had kind of made that observation. And the Dead Sea Scrolls, when they were found, affirm the Septuagint reading. And so I actually have an image of this up here where you'll notice that the highlighted text in the Dead Sea Scrolls, 4Q, Deuteronomy J, confirms the Septuagint reading, where the Greek text reads, and you'll see underneath that I've got an image of this, the Greek text reads, Angelon Theo, angels of God. The Masoretic text reads Bene Israel, the sons of Israel, but the Dead Sea Scrolls read Bene Elohim, the sons of God. So this leaves modern translations with a decision that they have to make. And most updated translations today, ESV, NLT, opt to affirm the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint reading of the sons of God. Translations that choose sons of Israel typically include a footnote at the very bottom to acknowledge that, in fact, the Dead Sea Scrolls and Septuagint have sons of God and not sons of Israel. And so once again, I've got an image for you that you can see that kind of shows the different Bible translations and what their decisions are. And I've got ESV as my source text. And so you can kind of see the percentage difference between each of the translations. And you'll notice the higher the difference, it's because of a deviation that goes away from the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint. The implications of this are actually pretty massive. Deuteronomy 32:8-9, when read in the light of the Tower of Babel incident, becomes the very origin story of the gods of the nations. This is the seedbed of national conflict. It's the chaotic reality behind the constant turmoil that's taking place between Israel and the nations of the world and their gods. So the sons of God of Deuteronomy 32:8-9 eventually are corrupted, and they shift from their designated responsibility as stewardship and stewards of the nations into eliciting the worship of the people, and in so doing go into full-on rebellion as they become the false gods of the nations. This is exactly and precisely what God warns the people of in Deuteronomy 4:19. The nations had worshipped the suns and the stars, which were connected to real spiritual beings, and these beings rebelled against God and his people. So when you have this and then you read Genesis chapter 12, you've got Ur of the Chaldeans, all this starts to make a lot of sense. God calls Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldeans, and this is the beginning spot of reclaiming his people and his land from the clutches of the fallen sons of God who are rebellious against God and God's creation. Abram comes from Ur of the Chaldeans. Ur of the Chaldeans was a location that was well known for their ziggurat temple towers, aka Tower of Babel. Ur of the Chaldeans is actually roughly in the vicinity of the Babel area. And in what I would call a savage Yahweh moment, Yahweh literally reaches into the epicenter of rebellion, and he grabs one family and calls them out of rebellion and into restoration, and in so doing begins the process of being a God who redeems and restores the nations of the world. This is why the Abrahamic covenant of Genesis 12, 15, 17, and 22 is so vitally important for us, and why it is the backbone of the biblical narrative. It is because it is a desire of Yahweh to have the nations back, that Abram would be a blessing, he would be blessed, and he would be a blessing to the nations of the world. Okay, now why is all this so important? And how is it connected to the house of David and this battlefield moment between David and Goliath? Okay, let's just summarize it this way. David is an Israelite, and he's a descendant of Jacob. Remember Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9. It's that verse 9 that's so interesting, that that Yahweh picks Jacob as his allotted people, his inheritance. And so David is a representation of that allotment, of that inheritance. David belongs to Yahweh. Well, who is Goliath? Goliath is a Philistine warrior from Gath. We're going to notice that this actually is going to be important here in a second. But who are the Philistines? The Philistines are one of those rebellious nations that are being led by a false god of the nations. The Philistines were led by a god named Dagon. Dagon was the Philistine god. There's a lot of questions about the etymology of Dagon and what kind of god or deity he was. Probably the best scholarship lets us know that he was some kind of grain god. But there is some evidence to suggest that there's something connected with the sea, and there might even be some rough etymology with Dagon as potentially being coming from kind of this fish language and imagery. Most scholars today reject that view. I think it's important that I say that. But it was a view that was held for some time. Well, the Philistines, a national group who worship the god Dagon, just go back to 1 Samuel 5:2, the story of the Ark of the Covenant in Dagon's temple. And then this is the conflict, because you've got Israel being essentially led by David, even though Saul is their king, and you've got the Philistines being led by Goliath. And there's this battle that takes place in the valley of Elah. This valley ran east and west between the Israelite and the Philistine territory. And so realistically, practically, God is expanding Israel's territory when David conquers Goliath in this valley. And this is cosmic geography. This is war. Why is this so important? How is this connected to the rest of the David story? Hey, Humble Theology fam, I'm so excited to share with you my first solo Bible study, Finding Peace Through Humility, a Bible study through the book of Judges. Now, the whole idea of the book of Judges is that the people of God are spiraling kind of out of control. And the question we have is it possible for them to actually come out of the spiral? And it is. And kind of what I present throughout this Bible study is that the thing that's hiding in plain sight, that God is just consistently trying to draw the people of Israel back then and his people today to, is the ancient virtue of humility. The gift of humility is the gift of self-awareness, so that we can know who God is, we can know who we are, and so that we are powerfully equipped to know other people. And so I'm really excited about this Bible study. There are video lessons that go with it, and of course, this Bible study guide as well. You can get Finding Peace Through Humility on Amazon, wherever Bible studies are sold. And then I'll also put a link for it as well in the show notes. Blessings to you, friends. And was David really a giant? So here's something that we know about Goliath, that Goliath's hometown was Gath. Well, when you look at Joshua 11, 21 through 22, we actually find that one of the giant clans of the Anakim, who are related to the Nephilim, they had left survivors, and some of those survivors of the Nephilim were, guess where? In Gath. The Nephilim were the product of an unholy union between the sons of God and human women. It's described in Genesis 6. Your mind might be blown right now. I mean, mine is, absolutely. And so what you actually find is a descendant of the Nephilim and the Anakim in Gath, who's in fact a Philistine, Goliath. And this descendant, this giant, we're going to get into more about this in the next video, is in fact going to come against the people of God once again. And so God raises up David to be his chosen vessel in order to deal with the evil that is present inside the world. Pretty amazing. I am absolutely loving the house of David. If you guys have questions, thoughts, comments, drop them in the comments section. And if you haven't already, I'd love for you to subscribe to the YouTube channel. It is super helpful for me as a creator, and just as a theologian and content developer to have your support. And so when you subscribe, it helps in a lot of different ways. If you've got some friends and family that are watching House of David and you're like, I think they're having some of these same questions, can I encourage you to just go ahead and share this video with them? And I am doing much more expanded writing. I'm actually looking at my notes here in my Humble Theology Substack. And so there's a link to that in the captions for this video. And you'll get much more nerdy theology kind of essays in my Substack. I'm grateful for you guys and thank you for joining me on this. In the next video, we're going to talk about Goliath and we're going to finally figure out if he's actually the descendant of the Anakim, the Nephilim. How tall was Goliath? We'll find out soon. Catch y'all later.